Oprah Winfrey stared across the stage and said 5 words that stunned the world. Jesus isn't real, Keanu. What happened next didn't just silence the room. It shattered the mask she'd worn for decades. And when Keanu dropped to his knees on live TV, the cameras caught something no one was ready for. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The morning mist curled low around the tree line, whispering through the towering evergreens that stood like quiet sentinels outside the windows of Keanu Reeves's secluded cabin. Inside, the stillness was almost sacred. No noise, no rush, just the soft hum of the kettle and the creak of old floorboards beneath his socks. A worn ceramic mug waited on the table, chipped on one side, its handle shaped by years of use. He poured the black coffee slowly, steam rising, curling into the cool air like breath from an invisible soul. The kitchen was humble, no fancy espresso machine or chef's knives in display, just basics: a scratched wooden countertop, mismatched plates, and a cast-iron pan that hung from a hook beside the stove. On the windowsill, just beneath the rising sun, sat an old Bible, its spine cracked, pages feathered and curled. Next to it was a letter. He hadn't planned to read mail this morning, but that envelope stood out. Pale lavender, the handwriting uneven and full of effort. A teenage girl named Emily, from Oregon. She had lost her father a year ago, cancer. She wrote that she'd been angry with God ever since, hadn't prayed, hadn't smiled in months. But one night she saw a clip of Keanu visiting a children's hospital. He hadn't said much in the clip, just held a sick boy's hand, listened to him, and sat with him for 20 quiet minutes. That was it. But to her it meant everything. She ended the letter with 12 words that hadn't left his mind since he read them. Your silence made me believe maybe God was still listening after all. Keanu sat with those words now, the coffee cooling in his hand. Outside, a deer stepped softly near the tree line, pausing just long enough to glance at the window, as if curious about the man behind the glass. He didn't move, just breathed. Still. Heavy. The weight of Emily's letter lingered in the air like the scent of pine and wood smoke. Then the sound came. Sharp, out of place. His phone. Not the sleek one he used for scripts and family, the old one, flip phone, barely held a charge. Only a handful of people even had the number. He stared at it for a moment, unsure if he should answer. Something about the timing didn't feel random. Finally, he flipped it open. Keanu? A familiar voice, tired but clear. It was his longtime publicist, Marianne. Hey, he said, still staring at the letter. Don't hang up, she added quickly. Just hear me out, okay? He sighed, set the mug down, glanced back at the words in Emily's slanted script. What is it? It's Oprah's team, she said. They want you on a live special, 2 weeks from now. Topic is Faith in the Modern World. They're doing this series on public figures whose actions reflect personal conviction, without preaching. They named you first. Keanu closed his eyes slowly. Not now, he murmured. Marian hesitated on the line, then spoke softly. Look, I know you don't like the spotlight anymore, and especially not live cameras, but this isn't about press. It's not some fluffy profile or viral stunt. They said, and I quote, Keanu represents a lived faith that isn't loud, but unmistakable. He didn't respond. He just stared out the window at the woods he'd come to rely on. Trees didn't ask questions. Mountains didn't interrupt. The quiet here wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. They said you've turned down endorsements from Christian clothing brands, that you never monetized your spiritual side, that you kept answering letters from strangers long after your agent said to stop. Marianne exhaled gently. I think they actually respect you, Keanu. He picked up the letter again. Emily had drawn a cross in the corner. It wasn't perfect. One line was longer than the other, but the effort showed. She had tried. He folded it slowly, carefully, and slipped it back into the envelope. "What do they want me to say?" he asked. "That's the strange part," Marianne said. "They don't want you to sell anything, not even a message. Oprah apparently just wants to talk about what you believe, not in theory, but in practice." He rubbed his temple. The last time he'd spoken about faith on camera, the interview had been edited so heavily his words barely resembled the truth. They'd cut out everything uncomfortable and left behind nothing but vague spiritualism wrapped in cinematic music. "I'm not interested in being someone's angle," he said. Marian's tone turned serious. "Keanu, I wouldn't bring this to you if it felt hollow. I think it could matter. Not for your image, for people. For someone like Emily." His name caught in her throat. "She included a photo in her letter, didn't she?" "Yeah," Keanu said quietly. He opened the envelope again. It was a Polaroid. Emily standing by a headstone, holding a DVD case of one of his old films. Her eyes were puffy, but she was smiling. Marianne continued. "Look, I told them you don't do scripted talking points. I told them you wouldn't come if it was some new age pitch with product placement." He cracked a dry smile. "And they still invited me?" They said. "That's exactly why we need him." The fire in the wood stove crackled. Outside, a raven called out through the mist. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of a river could be heard faintly, steady and sure. Keanu leaned back in his chair. The letter was still in his hand. The photo, too. He'd spent his whole career walking through rooms full of noise. But this felt different. "What's the date again?" he asked. 2 weeks, Marianne replied. He nodded slowly. His eyes drifted toward the Bible near the window, still open to Psalms. Marianne waited on the line. She knew better than to fill the silence. With Keanu, stillness wasn't avoidance. It was weight being measured. He stood up from the table, the floor creaking beneath his bare feet. The warmth from the mug had faded, but he sipped it anyway. Bitter, unchanged, just the way he liked it. "I'll pay my own way," he said finally. "No jet, no handlers. I want to walk, in quiet, and walk out the same." She didn't argue. Of course. They said it's a conversation about belief in action, not belief in theory. Marianne hesitated. "But I don't think they're ready for what you might say." "Neither do I," Keanu said gently. She gave him the production details, the address, the air date, the format. Then she let him go. No pressure, just space. That's how they'd always worked. She knew he only moved when something stirred deep enough to move him. He ended the call and set the phone down beside the envelope. Outside, the mist had begun to lift, revealing snow-dusted pines and the rough trail that led back into the forest, a trail he had walked almost every morning. But today he didn't move toward it. He just stood there, hand resting on the envelope, his thumb brushing over the uneven scrawl of a teenage girl who had somehow found courage inside her pain. A voice echoed quietly inside him, a memory. Not from a script, not from a film, from a night long ago, alone in a hotel room, broken in ways no one could see. He had opened a Bible someone had left in the drawer, not because he believed, because he had nothing else. And that night, one verse had stopped him cold. Psalm 34:18. "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." He picked up the Bible now and flipped until he found it. The page was wrinkled, marked with a faded underline from a decade ago. Keanu sat down again, staring at the verse. "This isn't about me," he whispered. "This is about someone watching who doesn't even know they're hanging on by a thread." He closed the Bible, folded Emily's letter and slid it inside the cover. Then he opened the drawer by the sink, took out a single piece of paper, and scribbled a note. "Gone for a while. Feed the dog if I'm not back in 5 days. Trust the trees. He pinned it to the door. Then he stepped outside into the brisk morning, boots crunching frost-bitten earth, and whispered 4 words to the wind. If you want me, I'll go. And with that, Keanu Reeves walked down the trail, not toward a stage, but toward a moment he didn't yet understand, a moment the world would never forget. The trail behind Keanu's cabin wound deep into the woods like a familiar hymn, slow and steady. His boots pressed into the frost-laced soil, crunching softly with each step. The trees here weren't just scenery, they were memory. They'd stood with him in silence when no one else did. When the grief came, when the doubt crept in, when the spotlight faded and the questions stayed, and the questions stayed. He stopped beside an old cedar stump where the bark had peeled back over the years like shedding armor. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a phone, his newer one this time. Scrolled through the contacts until he found the name, Frank Monroe. The man had been his quiet counsel for almost 20 years, a retired pastor who once baptized Keanu's sister during her battle with cancer. Frank didn't talk much, but when he did, it stuck. The phone rang twice before a gentle voice answered. "Keanu, that you?" "Yeah," he said, lowering himself to sit on the stump. "You all right?" "I don't know. That's why I'm calling." "Who on?" Keanu looked up through the trees, where slivers of blue sky peeked between the limbs. "Oprah's team invited me. Live broadcast, 2 weeks. Topic is faith." The Frank chuckled softly. "That's not usually your lane." "I know. You thinking about it?" "I am." "And what's keeping you from saying yes?" Keanu paused, then said, "I don't want to be used. I don't want to stand up there and be the quiet actor with a spiritual twist. You know the kind. They'll edit the silence into mystery, cut the name of Jesus, and sell the moment." Frank didn't speak for a while. Then he said, "Sounds like you're not worried about what they'll do to you. You're worried about what they'll do to the truth." "Exactly. Let me ask you something, son. When you read that girl's letter, the one who lost her dad, what stirred?" Keanu looked down at the ground. A small pine cone rested near his boot. "It felt like she wasn't writing to me. She was crying out for something deeper, something real. And part of me thought maybe this was for her, not for them." "Then that's who you speak for," Frank said. "You don't go for Oprah, you don't go for the cameras, you go for the one soul who needs to know they're not crazy for believing." Keanu blinked, heart slow. "But what if they twist it?" "Then let them twist it. Just make sure you're speaking something they can't untwist." Keanu let the silence stretch. "Thank you," he finally said. "Don't thank me," Frank replied. "Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "If you go, don't speak for yourself. Speak for the one who found you when you had nothing left to sell." The call ended, but the weight remained. Keanu stood from the stump and began walking deeper into the trees, as if the forest itself could help him process what words could not. He passed a bend in the trail where moss grew thick on an old fallen log. His hand reached out and brushed the surface gently, like touching something sacred. He had walked these woods for years, sometimes just to breathe, sometimes just to breathe, sometimes to weep, sometimes to escape the noise of a world that asked for too much and gave too little. Today felt different. There was no noise, but there was weight. He found the clearing he often returned to. No bench, no markers. Just a smooth patch of earth where the sunlight broke through the trees, laying gold across the ground like quiet fire. He knelt slowly, his knees pressing into the damp soil, and folded his hands. His prayer wasn't elegant. It wasn't rehearsed. It was broken in all the right places. "I don't want to perform. I don't want to posture. I just want to tell the truth without becoming the headline. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a prophet. I'm just someone you didn't give up on. So if I go, don't let me speak for myself. Let it be for you." He stayed there a while, long enough for the sun to shift, long enough for a squirrel to pause nearby and dart off again. When he finally rose, he didn't feel lighter, but he felt clearer. There was no script to follow, no production to plan, but there was a path, and he had already started walking it. By the time he returned to the cabin, the light had begun to dim. He opened the front door and stepped inside, still brushing pine needles from his coat sleeve. The air inside held the familiar scent of old books and cedar and coffee long gone cold. He set his phone on the counter and moved to the old bookshelf near the door. From behind a row of novels, he pulled out a weathered leather journal. Its edges were frayed, the binding soft. Inside were years of notes, some verses, some prayers, some lines he wrote in hotel rooms at 3 a.m. when the world felt heavy and invisible. Next, he grabbed the small wooden cross that hung from a nail above the doorframe. His sister had carved it for him years ago when she was in the hospital. He remembered how she had held it out to him and whispered, "Even if I don't get better, he's still good." He never hung it to show off. He hung it to remember. He wrapped the cross in a soft cloth and tucked it gently into his pack. Then he took the Bible from the windowsill, slid Emily's letter inside its pages, and zipped the pack closed. The next morning, before the sun even broke the ridgeline, Keanu stood on the front steps of his cabin. The sky was pale gray, touched with hints of lavender, the kind of color that didn't ask for attention, but held it anyway. His duffel bag sat beside him, zipped and ready. Inside were only the things that mattered: the cross, the Bible, the journal, and Emily's letter. Nothing more. He took a deep breath, then stepped off the porch, the cold morning air cutting into his lungs just enough to wake the edges of his thoughts. His motorcycle waited in the clearing, its frame rusted in places, the paint dulled from years of wind and road. He'd kept it not for style, but for memory. It reminded him of the days before the fame, before the noise, when life was simpler and faith wasn't something you had to defend with sound bites. He threw the duffel over his shoulder, strapped it down behind the seat, then stood still for a long moment. His hand rested on the handlebars, but his eyes lingered on the cabin. The smoke from the chimney had long since faded. The note was still pinned to the door. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet goodbye. He didn't say anything aloud this time. No second prayer, no last-minute doubts. He simply reached into his coat and pulled out a small slip of paper, one he'd kept folded for years. A verse scribbled in faint ink. Isaiah 6:8. "Here I am, send me." He stared at it for a moment, then folded it again and tucked it back into the pocket over his heart. The engine rumbled to life, low and steady. He gave it a moment to warm up, then climbed on, gloves pulled tight. The tires crunched over frozen leaves as he eased the bike out onto the narrow dirt path leading away from the trees. No camera followed, no crew documented the moment. But if anyone had been watching, they would have seen a man riding into something far bigger than himself. Not a stage, not a studio, a battleground. He didn't know what Oprah would say. He didn't know how the audience would react. He didn't even know if his words would reach beyond the edit bay. But he knew one thing for certain. There were people, quiet, wounded, searching, who needed to know they weren't alone in believing. And if that meant walking into fire, he'd walk slow, steady, and unshaken. The road curved, the forest opened, and Keanu Reeves disappeared into the rising light. The air outside Harpo Studios buzzed with movement, voices, and the faint hum of power cables running beneath the pavement. Keanu stepped out of the black sedan alone, wearing a plain charcoal coat and boots that had more years on them than the building's last renovation. His bag was slung over his shoulder, light but heavy with meaning. The doors ahead loomed wide, glass reflecting the morning sun, and rows of production lights lining the inside corridor like runway markers. He took a breath and stepped forward. Inside, the temperature dropped, not just physically, spiritually. The building was pristine, modern, polished to perfection. But underneath the smooth marble floors and filtered air was something colder. Calculated. Designed for impact. Two producers with headsets zipped by, one whispering, "We need a tighter transition between the light frequency segment and the soul realignment testimonial. Bump the affirmations to B-roll." Another voice responded through an earpiece. "Confirmed. Get graphics ready. Cut the old guy's footage if it runs long." Keanu walked slowly, letting the words pass through him without sticking. He wasn't surprised, but he was paying attention. Around the corner, a hallway lined with posters featured Oprah smiling alongside gurus, energy healers, and best-selling authors. Each one featured soft lighting and bold captions. "Unlock your radiance. You are the light. Heal from within." He paused at one. It showed Oprah standing in a beam of light, her hands raised slightly, eyes closed. Beneath her was the quote, "The divine begins when we remember we already are." He kept walking. A group of guests stood outside the makeup room, chatting. One of them, a man in an embroidered shawl, said with a grin, "Just get Reeves to say something vague about energy. That's all the viewers need. People project what they want onto him anyway." Laughter followed. Not cruel, just dismissive. Surface level. Keanu kept moving. Calm, but something inside stirred. Not anger, not even frustration, just a tightening sense of what this moment really was. He turned a corner and nearly ran into a young assistant juggling a tablet, water bottle, and clipboard. Her hair was tied back in a neat bun, and her smile was practiced, too fast to be genuine, but not unkind. "Mr. Reeves," she chirped, scanning her screen. "Okay, great, you're here. We've got you scheduled for a quick pre-interview with segment production, then we'll do a touch-up with hair and light powder just before the second camera team grabs the B-bottle. Should take less than 10. Keanu raised an eyebrow slightly. "I'm good without powder," he said. She blinked. "Of course, totally up to you. One quick thing. Do you have any book, meditation series, or merchandise you'd like us to feature on screen or in the credits?" He looked her in the eyes and said softly, "I'm not here to sell anything." The assistant's smile wavered for a moment, like someone hearing a phrase they hadn't rehearsed for. She checked her clipboard again, as if maybe she had misunderstood him. "No book at all? No course or brand collab? Even a devotional or something small? Oprah's audience really connects with tangible resources." Keanu kept his tone calm but unshakably clear. "I'm here for a conversation, not a commercial." She paused, then nodded quickly. "Right, of course. I'll make a note of that." Her voice was polite, but he saw the brief flash in her eyes. Anxiety. She wasn't annoyed. She was just used to the machine running a certain way, and someone had just thrown a wrench in the gears. She walked off briskly, muttering into her headset, "Yeah, Reeves isn't plugging anything. We'll have to adjust." Keanu stood in place for a moment. The hallway around him swirled with motion. PAs running errands, makeup artists adjusting palettes, a lighting tech kneeling to tape down a cable. The lights above didn't flicker, but the energy in the space felt jittery, manufactured, pressurized. He walked forward again, past another corridor lined with framed magazine covers. Oprah with world leaders. Oprah with spiritual icons. Oprah with celebrities crying on couches. A door opened ahead of him. A man in a crisp navy blazer, mic clipped to his lapel, was rehearsing lines into his phone camera. In today's Master Moment, we dive into what it means to transcend belief and embody limitless consciousness. Remember to pre-order my... Keanu turned into the adjacent hallway, away from the rehearsals. He didn't need to hear the rest. Down this quieter wing was the guest lounge. A sign read Green Room, though the walls were soft beige and the decor leaned modern. Inside, people sat under halo lights, talking into cameras or scrolling their curated talking points on tablets. A makeup artist dabbed highlighter on a man's cheekbone as he recited buzzwords like alignment, awakening, and vibration. Keanu stepped inside quietly, as if entering a chapel with no holiness. No one noticed him at first. Their eyes were on themselves, their reflections, or their phones. A low voice echoed from the far side of the room. Just remember, say abundance at least 3 times in the first 5 minutes. Our analytics show that term spikes audience retention by 14%. Keanu found a chair in the corner, near a half-empty water cooler. He sat down slowly, set his bag by his feet, and unzipped it. From inside, he pulled the same Bible that had sat on his windowsill just days earlier. He rested it on his lap, didn't open it yet, just placed one hand on the cover like someone steadying themselves in a storm. In the middle of noise and neon belief, he just sat, quiet, still, and for a moment it felt like silence had made its way into the room again. Someone across the room laughed, loud, sharp, forced. A woman in a velvet blazer held up her phone to record a story post, voice animated as she said, "Gratitude is the currency of the soul, and my new journal helps you invest every day." A few heads turned toward her. Ring lights blinked on. A producer near the side wall pointed to a monitor showing live social media metrics. Her pre-roll just doubled engagement. That's what we need from Keanu. If we can get him to drop one spiritual phrase, boom, viral clip. Monetize the silence. Keanu remained still. He didn't raise his voice, didn't roll his eyes. He just opened the Bible slowly, flipped past worn pages until he landed in Matthew. His finger traced the margin of a verse, pausing at the words, "Beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them." He whispered the verse under his breath. No theatrics, no performance, just truth in a room that seemed allergic to it. Then a man with slicked hair and a cashmere scarf leaned in from the adjacent couch and said casually, "You're Keanu, right? Listen, huge fan. Honestly, you're gonna crush this segment. People love the mystic monk vibe. Just say something about the universe listening or energy alignment. Doesn't matter what exactly. You've got that soulful look. People eat it up." Keanu closed his Bible gently. "I'm not here to feed anyone's brand," he said softly. The man blinked. "No judgment," Keanu added. "Just not my lane." Before the man could respond, a different assistant approached with a headset and a clipboard. "Mr. Reeves, we're 5 minutes from segment prep. Can I walk you to staging?" Keanu nodded, stood up, and picked up his bag. He didn't move quickly. He wasn't being defiant. He was just choosing every step with intention. As he followed her toward the hallway leading to the studio doors, the noise behind him seemed to rise again. More instructions, more slogans, more rehearsed vulnerability. But he kept walking, and the silence walked with him. The assistant cleared her throat as they reached the doors. "Just confirming again, no promotion, right? No materials, no campaign plug?" Keanu looked her in the eyes. "No books, no brands, no pitch." She tilted her head, unsure how to process that. "Okay then, you're up next, after the guided breathwork segment. Just wait behind the curtain till your name is called." He nodded, and just before she stepped away, she asked one last question. "So, what are you here for?" He didn't hesitate. For the truth, and whoever's still out there listening for it. The green room wasn't green. It wasn't quiet either. And it sure didn't feel like a room meant for preparation. It buzzed like a beehive, filled with the scent of hairspray and essential oil diffusers plugged into every corner. Cameras on stands rotated lazily toward influencers, filming quick segments on self-love alignment. One woman sat cross-legged on a velvet ottoman, repeating her mantras into a ring light. "I am radiant. I am divine. I am my own healer." Her voice was breathy, deliberate, practiced. To her right, a tall man with bleached hair stood in front of a mirror, adjusting his silk scarf, repeating a pitch to himself. "When you unlock your inner compass, the universe adjusts your outer reality." Then he smiled at his reflection. Perfect. Another woman nearby was applying her own lip gloss while talking into a phone with earbuds in. Just make sure my soul detox masterclass is mentioned before segment 6. Yeah, no, right before the sound bath. That's when engagement peaks. Keanu stepped into the room and paused. It felt less like a holding space and more like a stage before the stage. Every person warming up, polishing their parts, preparing not to speak truth, but to perform it. No one noticed him at first, which suited him just fine. He scanned the space for an empty chair that didn't have makeup bags or cords strewn across it. Finally, in the far corner, beside a table of untouched fruit platters, he found one. A quiet spot, not in the flow of cameras or wires, just still. He walked over, set his duffel down, and pulled out his Bible. He didn't open it dramatically, didn't flash it around like a prop. He simply placed it on his lap, thumbed gently through the pages, and stopped at the Psalms. His eyes landed on a familiar verse. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" He read it softly under his breath. The words settled like stones in a river, unmoved by the rush around him. A young man in designer sneakers plopped down in the seat next to him and looked over. "Whoa, that's like a real Bible?" Keanu nodded without looking up. Leather-bound, well-worn, pages dog-eared from years of quiet mornings. The man grinned. "I haven't seen one of those outside a hotel nightstand since ever. You use that for quotes or something?" Keanu turned a page slowly. "I use it to stay grounded." The man tilted his head. "Huh. Weird flex, but okay." Then he stood up, muttering as he walked away. "Can't teach faith without a conversion funnel anyway." Keanu's eyes closed for a moment. Not to sleep, just to breathe. A quiet prayer stirred from the back of his mind. "Don't let me get bitter. Let me stay grounded." Laughter erupted from across the room. A group of 3 guests stood under one of the soft ring lights, taking turns filming short clips. "You are not broken," one of them said into the camera, eyebrows lifted with faux gravity. "You're just misaligned with your frequency," the second added. "And if your frequency feels off, don't worry. We've got a 7-day vibration reset on sale right now. Link in bio." The third laughed and leaned in, whispering, "Don't forget to smudge before sleep. Bad vibes hide in the corners." They collapsed into giggles and high-fived each other. One of them turned to a producer and asked, "Do we have our backdrop set? I want that galaxy swirl thing, makes my eyes pop." Keanu looked down at his Bible again. He ran his fingers along the edge of the page, then slowly closed it, keeping Emily's letter tucked safe inside. The walls around him didn't just feel loud, they felt hollow. He watched a woman in her 60s finish getting makeup applied, then walk over to a mirror where she rehearsed her lines. "Oh, pain is an illusion of the ego," she said with a soft smile. "Once you dissolve identity, you dissolve suffering." But Keanu saw something she didn't think anyone was watching. Her hand trembled as she brushed her hair behind her ear. Not from nerves, from fatigue. She didn't believe what she was saying, at least not fully. A few seats away, a man in robes was whispering to another guest. "She's got 4.5 million followers. Just being in the same segment as her triples visibility. I'm trying to time my affirmation drop right after hers." Ride the energy. Keanu took a deep breath. "Don't let me get bitter." A few feet away, the man in the cashmere scarf from earlier returned. He spotted Keanu and leaned down. "Hey, look. Sorry if I came off pushy earlier. It's just, you know how it is. People want authenticity, but only if it trends. You're like perfect for this crowd. You've got the whole mystic loner thing going. You say one line about finding God in the silence and boom, instant viral." Keanu met his eyes and said calmly, "I don't care about viral." The man paused, caught off guard. "I care about truth. If I don't have that, I don't care who's listening." The man straightened, letting out a quiet breath. Okay, well, good luck out there, I guess. He walked off, adjusting his mic pack. Keanu picked up the Bible again and rested it against his chest, both hands holding it like a shield. Not because he felt under attack, because it reminded him who he was when everything else tried to define him. Show dare. Then he whispered again, just for himself. Don't let me perform, just let me be present. Across the room, someone shouted, she's gonna love the part about chakras and inner child healing. Ratings gold. Another producer laughed and pointed at a chart on a tablet. Segment 4 is tracking high. If Keanu even mentions meditation, our engagement curve spikes. Keanu closed his eyes briefly. The noise had taken on a rhythm, like static dressed in spiritual robes. Everyone here was selling something. Not all with bad intent, but too many confusing healing with branding. He looked around the room once more. Every face polished, every word rehearsed, every moment engineered for reaction. And then something small caught his eye. A janitor, mid-50s, wearing a gray uniform and pushing a mop bucket, entered through the side door. He moved without urgency, without concern for the chaos around him. No clipboard, no camera, no performance. Just doing his job. As he swept near Keanu's corner, he gave a small nod. You're the quiet one, right? Keanu gave a small smile. Trying to be. The janitor smiled back and tapped his chest lightly. I respect that. Lot of noise in here. Real easy to forget what matters. Keanu nodded slowly. What's your name? James, the man said. But most people don't bother asking. Keanu extended a hand. Thank you for keeping the place clean. James chuckled. I just mop floors. You're the one stepping into the fire. Then he moved on, pushing his bucket past the cosmetic counter, where an assistant was debating lip tint options with a stylist. Keanu sat back, letting James's words settle. You're the one stepping into the fire. Not a compliment, not flattery, just recognition. He looked down at his Bible one more time. Emily's letter peeked slightly from between the pages. He reached in and unfolded it, rereading her words. I just need to know if someone still believes. That was it. Not theology, not debate. Just a girl aching to believe again. To believe someone still meant it when they said hope wasn't for sale. He folded the letter again, gently, slipped it back into the spine of the Bible. The door opened. A voice called out from the hallway, clear and controlled. Mr. Reeves? You're up in 10. They're calling you to stage. Keanu rose from the chair, slinging the strap of his bag over his shoulder. He looked once more around the green room, the ring lights, the fake smiles, the influencers, reciting lines. He didn't judge them, but he didn't follow them either. He walked toward the door, and just before crossing the threshold, he whispered a final prayer to the stillness inside him. You keep me honest. The hallway leading to the studio stage was dimmer than the rest of the building, intentionally so, a quiet tunnel before the blast of light and sound. But even in the darkened corridor, there were signs of the show's design. Large framed quotes lined the walls, all with Oprah's name printed beneath them. Faith is what you make it. Divinity lives in your personal truth. The highest power is within you. Keanu walked slowly past each one, not out of judgment, but out of reflection. He wasn't here to argue with anyone's search for meaning. He just wasn't sure these walls were built for answers. He reached the final turn and stopped short of the curtain. A stage assistant greeted him with a clipboard and a hushed voice. All right, Mr. Reeves, you'll enter stage left, directly across from Oprah. Just take a seat in the guest chair when your name's called. We're live, so there's no room for pause once you're on. Keanu nodded. Understood. You good on mic and IFB? I'm good. The assistant smiled, a little stiffly, then turned and gave the go-ahead signal to the control booth. Through the curtain, he could already hear the applause dying down from the last segment. A woman's voice, soft, spiritual, heavily branded, spoke about aligning with the sacred pulse of the universe. Oprah thanked her, promised to plug her book again after the commercial break, then pivoted toward the camera. And now, a guest who needs no introduction. The audience stirred. The applause sign blinked on. Keanu could hear it even before he stepped out. Philosopher, quiet icon of inner peace. He's captured the world's imagination for decades, not just on screen, but with the way he moves through life, with stillness, with kindness, and with humility. Please welcome Keanu Reeves. The curtain parted. He stepped into the light. The first thing he noticed was how bright it was, not just from the spotlights, but from the shine of the polished floor, the glass panels, the white gold glow of the backdrop. The second thing was the silence under the applause. It wasn't a stadium roar. It was polite, controlled, curious, as if everyone in the room was waiting to see what version of Keanu they'd get today. He crossed the stage slowly, not hesitating, but not rushing either. Every step felt measured, grounded. Oprah rose to greet him with a wide smile. She extended her arms and they embraced briefly, politely. Cameras caught every angle. "Welcome, Keanu. Thank you for being here. Thank you for having me." They both took their seats, just a few feet of polished studio floor between them. But in spirit, it already felt like a canyon. Oprah adjusted her seat slightly, crossed one leg over the other, and faced the audience. "Keanu Reeves," she began, her voice warm and practiced. "You've been described as a symbol of peace, strength, and quiet wisdom. From blockbuster films to unexpected acts of kindness that go viral, people feel drawn to you, not just because of what you do, but because of who you are." She paused, smiled, turned back toward him. "So, let's begin right there. What's your secret?" Keanu looked out at the audience. The lights obscured their faces. He could see silhouettes, but not eyes. Still, he spoke to them. Not just to Oprah, not just to the cameras, but to someone who might be listening beyond all the noise. "It's not a secret," he said slowly. "It's grace." "Grace?" He nodded. "Just grace I didn't deserve." Oprah's smile twitched slightly. It was subtle, but it was there. Not because she was offended, but because that answer didn't fit the rhythm she was expecting. There was no brand in it, no arc to ride. She leaned in, keeping her voice even. "That's beautiful," she said, "and mysterious too. We often talk here about grace as a kind of universal love, a mirror of the self. But tell me more. When you say grace, what does that mean to you?" Keanu didn't hesitate. "It means I've been carried, even when I didn't know how to stand. It means I didn't earn the peace I have. It was given to me, through pain, through loss, through things I wouldn't wish on anyone." The room shifted, not physically but in tone. The energy dipped from excitement into something quieter, something more raw. Oprah smiled again, her tone gentle but guiding. "That resonates with so many people watching. Life's pain, it wakes us up, doesn't it? I write about that in my new book, Live Through the Light, which is part of the Faith Without Borders series we're releasing next month. It explores how every path to healing leads inward." Keanu listened, eyes soft but unmoved. She looked back at him. "Would you agree that truth is found by going inward?" He took a breath. "Not for me," he said. Oprah blinked once. "I think you can learn a lot about your wounds by looking inward. But truth, the kind that saves you, that's not inside me. That came from above me." The audience was silent. No one shifted. No one clapped. Just stillness. Oprah uncrossed her legs, recrossed them. Her voice stayed calm, but her smile no longer reached her eyes. "So, not from within, but from beyond?" Keanu nodded. "I didn't find God by finding myself. I found him when I finally let go of myself." And that was when Oprah's hand subtly tightened around the cue cards resting in her lap. She didn't look down at the cards yet. She didn't need to. Her eyes stayed fixed on Keanu, but her posture changed. Less fluid now, more measured. "You're aware," she said softly, "that many people watching today follow all kinds of beliefs. Some through God, others through the universe, some through nothing at all. Wouldn't you say that truth, in its purest form, is relative? That what's true for you might be different for someone else?" Keanu's voice was quiet but unwavering. "I think feelings can be relative, experiences, perceptions, but truth? That's not something we invent, it's something we find. Or run from?" He paused, and I spent a lot of years running. A few members of the audience stirred, not with discomfort, yet, but with attention. This wasn't the conversation they'd expected. There were no sound baths, no soft affirmations, no promises of energy alignment, just a man in a chair telling a truth that didn't fit the set. Oprah's tone sharpened slightly, though her smile remained. "That's a strong conviction. Do you believe that truth, your version of truth, is the only way?" Keanu didn't flinch. "I don't think it's mine. I think it's his. And I don't think it changes based on how we feel about it." Oprah set her cards down. "So let's say, for argument's sake, that someone grew up Buddhist, or Muslim, or simply spiritual without a name. They live with compassion. They practice kindness. You're saying they're what, wrong?" Keanu's eyes didn't harden. They softened. "I'm saying that love matters. But love without truth doesn't save us. It comforts, it soothes, but it doesn't rescue." He leaned forward slightly, not to dominate the moment, but to bring it closer. "I'd been in rooms where people were dying. Friends, strangers. I'd held hands that were shaking in fear. And in that moment, it wasn't peace they wanted. It wasn't alignment. It was forgiveness. It was assurance that death wasn't the end, that someone greater still held them." A hush spread like fog across the room. Even the camera operators had stopped adjusting their frames. Oprah opened her mouth to speak, then closed it, just for a moment. Then she smiled again, tightly this time, and said, "Well, that was not where I expected this to go." Keanu looked at her gently. "Maybe that's the point." The audience didn't applaud. Not yet. They were waiting. Watching. And above the stage, the slogan still glowed in bright gold. "Faith is what you make it." But something about it now felt dimmer, as if someone had just walked in and reminded the room that maybe, just maybe, faith wasn't something we make. Maybe it was something we surrendered to. Oprah folded her hands neatly in her lap, letting a silence stretch between them just long enough to reset the mood. Her voice, when it returned, had changed slightly. It still held its trademark smoothness, but underneath was a sharpened curiosity, one that came not from wonder, but from resistance. "Let me ask you something directly," she said. "You talk about grace, about truth, about finding God not within, but above. That's Jesus, right? That's who you're pointing to?" Keanu nodded once, calmly. "Yes." "Then let's go there," she said, smiling politely. "You believe in Jesus, but isn't truth, especially spiritual truth, something personal?" Keanu met her gaze. "Truth can be experienced personally, but that doesn't mean we get to invent it. Personal doesn't mean created. It means discovered." She tilted her head slightly, as if studying him from a different angle. "But your truth, your belief in Jesus, that's not everyone's truth. Some people find peace in other faiths, other stories, other gods. Isn't it possible that truth bends to the shape of the soul searching for it?" Keanu paused before answering, his voice gentle but steady. "Truth doesn't bend for comfort, it breaks us open, and then it builds us back honest." The audience was still. No fidgeting, no whispers. Even the floor crew had grown unnaturally quiet. Oprah kept her eyes on him, her fingers now tapping gently against her note cards. "But don't you worry," she asked, "that speaking this way, this confidently, could be seen as judgmental? Exclusive?" He looked down briefly, then back up. "Of course I worry, but not for my image. I worry that we've confused kindness with silence, that we've mistaken real love for agreement. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is tell the truth, even if it costs you approval." Oprah inhaled slowly, then nodded. "So you're saying that your path, this Jesus you speak of, is the truth? The only truth?" Keanu's answer came slowly. "Yes, but not because I said it, because he did." The words didn't hit like a hammer. They dropped like a stone into deep water, and that water rippled. A man in the third row shifted slightly in his seat. A woman on the far left lowered her eyes, not out of offense, out of introspection. Oprah leaned back, crossing one leg again. "So, you're not afraid to sound narrow?" Keanu offered the first faint smile of the interview. "Truth is always narrow. A bridge that holds your weight can't be every shape. A surgeon can't be vague. A parachute can't be optional. And salvation? That's not something you customize." He paused. "If there's a God who came to find us, who gave his life for us, then that truth can't be one of many. It's either everything or it's nothing." Oprah didn't respond right away. She looked toward the audience, as if drawing strength from the stillness. Then her gaze returned to Keanu. "And what would you say," she asked softly, "to the millions of people who find comfort in spirituality without structure, who believe in love, in light, in the good, without tying it to any one name?" Keanu's voice was gentle. "I'd say I understand that search. I really do. I spent a long time there myself." He shifted slightly in his chair, resting his hands together. "There was a time when I wanted the peace without the person. I liked the idea of light. I just didn't want to face the source of it. I told myself I could borrow the warmth without knowing the fire. But it didn't last." "Why not?" Oprah asked. "Because borrowed light fades." He let the words hang in the air for a moment. "It gave me moments of inspiration, but not transformation. And when the bottom dropped out, when grief hit, when guilt hit, I didn't need ideas. I needed someone who could carry what I couldn't." "And that's when you found Jesus?" Keanu's expression softened. "That's when he found me." The studio was frozen in that instant. There was no dramatic music, no applause, just the raw sound of someone speaking what they believed without hesitation. Oprah leaned forward slightly, her voice still composed but edged now with urgency. "But what if someone's never had that moment, never had a breakdown or a motel room experience or a personal revelation? What if they've found peace in meditation or poetry or simply helping others?" Keanu didn't argue. He nodded. "I'm not here to take away peace from anyone, but I am here to say this. Real peace, the kind that doesn't shift with circumstance, it doesn't come from us, it comes to us. And it has a name, Jesus." And there was no pride in his tone, no arrogance, just quiet conviction. And in that moment, the tension in the room wasn't angry, it wasn't hostile, it was sacred. The kind of tension that happens when two worldviews meet and neither one flinches. Oprah folded her hands again. "You're aware this is being broadcast to millions, right?" "Yes." "And you're not worried about losing half of them?" Keanu looked straight ahead. "I'd rather lose the crowd than lose the truth." Someone in the second row gasped, not loudly but audibly enough that Oprah turned her head. She straightened in her seat, her next words slower now. "You realize you just called a lot of people wrong?" Keanu didn't blink. "No. I called one person right." Oprah's jaw moved slightly, as if weighing her next words carefully. She was seasoned in conversations like this, where tension simmered just beneath civility. But this one felt different. Not because Keanu had said something cruel, he hadn't. In fact, the gentleness of his tone only made his words land harder. She uncrossed her legs and leaned forward, voice smooth but laced with challenge. So you're saying that if someone doesn't believe in Jesus, they're, what, lost? Keanu didn't answer right away, not because he was avoiding it, but because he refused to let that question become a weapon. I'm saying that we're all lost, he said slowly, me included. That's why he came, not to reward the good, but to rescue the broken. And the people in this room, she asked, sweeping her hand toward the audience. The viewers at home, the ones who've found meaning in other paths? Keanu looked out at the room. The lights made it hard to see faces clearly, but he didn't speak to the shapes. He spoke like someone believing a specific heart was listening. I'm not against anyone. I'm not condemning anyone. I'm just saying this. Truth doesn't bow to popularity, and salvation isn't a marketplace. He leaned forward, voice low but heavy with clarity. If truth changes every time we're uncomfortable, then it was never truth. It was preference. The audience was absolutely silent now, a kind of quiet that doesn't happen on talk shows. Not staged, not scheduled, just real. Oprah tilted her head, the edge in her voice now unmistakable. But can't you see how this comes off? You're beloved, respected, and yet here you are saying there's only one path and implying every other is not enough. Doesn't that make you feel responsible for the weight of that? Keanu nodded once. Yes, but not ashamed. She sat back, crossing her arms lightly. Her face was composed, but the warmth had faded. You didn't come here to be inspirational, did you? No, Keanu said. Then why did you come? He paused, and when he answered, it wasn't for drama. It was with steady, sober truth. Because there's someone watching this right now, in a hospital bed, in a motel room, or sitting alone with questions they're scared to speak aloud. And they don't need a mantra. They don't need a slogan. They need to know they're not too far gone. That love came for them. That hope isn't a brand. It's a person. He looked directly into the camera. And I came for them. The silence that followed didn't feel tense. It felt holy. And Oprah, for the first time, had no reply. The tension in the room was no longer invisible. It had settled into the lighting, into the stillness of the crew, into the way not a single person in the audience dared to move. You could hear the soft whir of a camera motor somewhere behind the stage. Even the air conditioning felt too loud. Oprah's face was composed, but her hands betrayed her. The note cards in her lap were bent now, slightly curled at the edges where her fingers had pressed them too tightly. Her breathing was measured, but no longer relaxed. For the first time in perhaps years, she wasn't steering the moment. Keanu's words still echoed faintly in the atmosphere. I came for them. She cleared her throat, shifted in her seat, and looked down for a moment, just long enough to make the world think she was collecting herself. Then she looked up and smiled, but there was no warmth in it. So, you came to witness. Yes, to speak what you believe, no matter the cost? That's right. She nodded, then leaned forward slightly. And that belief? You're willing to say it here in front of millions, in front of seekers, believers, skeptics, atheists, that your truth is the only one that saves? I'm not the one who said it, Keanu replied calmly. Jesus did. Her smile flattened. So you follow a man who lived thousands of years ago, in a different culture, a different world, with no Instagram, no satellites, no modern knowledge. And you expect people here today to believe that he's the only way? Keanu's expression didn't change. His eyes didn't harden. His posture didn't stiffen. Yes, there was a pause. Oprah blinked. Once, twice. Then her voice dropped slightly, not loud, but clear. Jesus is a myth. Gasps broke out from the audience like shattering glass. A few people audibly sucked in air. Someone near the back stood up and quickly sat back down. One of the camera operators lowered his lens to the floor. She didn't stop. A comforting illusion. That's what he is. A story people like you cling to because it's easier than facing the fact that we're all we've got, that the universe doesn't revolve around us, that there's no eternal safety net. Keanu didn't flinch. Not a muscle moved, not a flicker of emotion across his face. And when he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet that the room had to lean in to hear it. He was real enough to die for me. The words didn't boom. They didn't echo. They landed. Heavy. Final. Oprah leaned back. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Her next breath was sharp. The audience didn't move. Not yet. The tension that followed was unlike anything ever aired from that stage. Even the seasoned floor crew, professionals used to live chaos, looked stunned. One sound technician glanced at the control booth, waiting for a cue that never came. The applause sign didn't light up. There was no music swell, just breathing, uncomfortable, heavy breathing. Oprah sat very still. Her hand moved once across the fabric of her slacks, smoothing something invisible. She opened her mouth, but what came out didn't sound like a host. It didn't sound like branding. It sounded like something old and raw. So, all this time, all these years I've spent building bridges, bringing people together from every faith, every background. You're telling me none of it matters? Keanu met her eyes. His tone never changed. I didn't say that. You implied it. No, I didn't. I said Jesus matters, that he's the bridge. Not me, not you, not what we build. What he gave. Oprah's lips parted, then pressed together. Her fingers curled around the armrest of the chair. You know what I think? He waited. I think you're afraid, just like everyone else, afraid of meaninglessness, afraid of death, afraid of losing control. So you reach for the simplest story, the one that says someone else is in charge, that it's all okay in the end, that someone's got you. Keanu nodded once. I am afraid, or I used to be, until I met the one who isn't. Her voice rose a notch. He's not here. He's not sitting in that chair. You talk about him like he's in the room, but he's not. Keanu's voice dropped to a whisper again. He's closer than the chair. A woman in the second row began crying. Not loudly, not for attention, just softly, one hand over her mouth. A man in the fourth row reached over and grabbed her hand. Oprah saw it. Her eyes darted to the audience, and for a moment, something flickered behind her gaze. Something that looked like fear. She turned back sharply. You think I don't believe because I'm proud, but I know what this is. I know what this stage does. I know what hope costs. I've built my life trying to give people a voice, trying to help them find their power. And you sit here and say, that's not enough? Keanu didn't raise his voice. He didn't react. He just looked at her with eyes that had seen too many funerals, too many hospital beds, too many letters from people on the edge. It's not enough, because you weren't meant to carry it all. None of us were. And in that instant, the control room went silent. Nobody gave direction. Nobody said cut. The machine paused, because something real had just entered the room. Oprah looked down, her face unreadable. The stack of cue cards in her lap slipped sideways, spilling onto the floor with a soft flutter. She didn't move to pick them up. Her fingers remained clenched around the armrest, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. She lifted her head again, slower this time, and stared straight at Keanu. You sit there so calm, she said, her voice hoarse. So certain. But what if you're wrong? Keanu didn't hesitate. Then I lose nothing. I lived in grace. I loved others the best I could. But if I'm right, and he is who he said he is, then that changes everything. For all of us. Oprah's lip trembled. She opened her mouth, searching for a comeback, but it didn't come. And so instead, she said something no one expected. You're just another man clinging to an old myth because life hurt too much. A sharp inhale spread through the audience. This time, no one even tried to hide their reaction. One camera operator had tears in his eyes. The assistant stage manager pressed a hand to her forehead. A producer offstage stepped forward as if to stop the segment, then hesitated. Keanu lowered his eyes, then looked up again. Maybe, or maybe I met the only one who knows what to do with hurt like mine. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat, pulled out something folded, worn, held it up. This is a letter from a girl named Emily, 14 years old. Her dad died last year. She wrote me because she didn't believe anymore, not in God, not in hope, not in anything, until she saw a clip of me sitting with a boy in a hospital, just listening, just being there. He unfolded the paper gently, reverently. She said it made her wonder if anyone out there still believed in something bigger than themselves. He turned toward the cameras. Emily, if you're watching, yes, I do. Oprah's expression faltered. Her voice came quieter now. I didn't mean to attack your faith. I've carried this image for so long. I don't know how to let it go. You don't have to, Keanu said gently. You just have to stop pretending it's holding you up. She blinked quickly. And what if I fall? Then fall, he said. But fall into grace. Not the kind you created, the kind that created you. The room was silent. Not a breath, not a sound. Oprah looked at the cameras, then back at Keanu. And finally, she whispered, I don't know how to believe anymore. Keanu leaned forward. Then just let him meet you in the disbelief. Keanu reached into the inside pocket of his coat again, fingers brushing over worn fabric, until they found the letter. He didn't rush. He unfolded it gently, his movements deliberate, as if it were something sacred. The audience held its breath. He glanced once toward Oprah, then looked down at the page and began to read aloud. Dear Mr. Reeves, my name is Emily. I'm 14. I know you don't know me, and I don't expect you to write back. But I had to tell you something. I lost my dad 6 months ago. He had a heart attack in our kitchen. I saw it happen. I tried to help. I called 911, I screamed, I begged. But he was already gone before they got there. My mom's not really here anymore either, not the way she used to be. She just kind of floats now. I think she's sad every second. I don't blame her. I'm sad every second too. I stopped believing in anything after that. Not just God. I stopped believing in people. I stopped believing in the idea that life could be good again. Until one night, I was watching clips online, and I found a video of you. It wasn't a movie. It was you on a stage, quiet, listening to a boy in a wheelchair. You didn't say much. You just looked at him like he mattered, like his voice was the most important thing in the world. And at the end, you said something. You said, don't give up on hope. Hope hasn't given up on you. Keanu paused. A murmur moved through the crowd, soft as the rustle of leaves. He took a breath and continued. That line stuck in my head. I wrote it on my mirror in red marker. Every time I got up and looked at my face, I saw your words. I didn't believe them at first, but something about the way you said them made me want to try. Then, one night, I pulled out the Bible my grandma gave me. I hadn't touched it in years. I opened it at random and landed on a page that said, "The Lord is near to the brokenhearted." It felt like someone had reached into my hospital room and whispered that sentence into my chest. I'm still broken, but something's starting to shift. So, I need to ask you something. Is Jesus real? Please, don't give me a nice answer. Please tell me the truth. Emily. Keanu folded the letter slowly. He held it in his lap for a moment before lifting his head. His eyes weren't teary, they were steady, steadier than anything on that stage. He looked directly at Oprah. "Would you tell her he isn't?" Oprah didn't answer. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. The audience watched her, waiting. But she didn't speak. Because there wasn't a script for this part. There wasn't a commercial for heartbreak that deep. Keanu let the silence linger. Not out of defiance, but reverence. He wasn't demanding an answer from Oprah. He wasn't trapping her. He was inviting her into the same question that Emily had asked, a question deeper than debate, beyond branding, beyond show. The studio light seemed less blinding now, or maybe it was the way people were no longer watching the set, but the soul behind it. Would you tell her he isn't? Oprah stared at the letter in his hands. Her voice was soft when it finally returned. I don't know what I'd tell her, she admitted. Keanu nodded, not triumphantly, but gently. It's okay not to know, but not knowing doesn't mean pretending there isn't truth. She looked at him, more human than ever. All the polish was gone, all the practiced control, and in its place something raw, something real. Do you really believe he hears her? Oprah asked. That he hears you? Keanu looked down again at the letter. Every time I doubt, I remember that he answered Emily through a whisper on a stage I didn't want to be on, through words I didn't plan to say, through a moment I didn't even think mattered. He folded the letter carefully and slid it back into his coat. She heard something in that moment. I believe that wasn't me. Oprah leaned back in her chair, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't argue, she didn't deflect. The audience sat frozen in the stillness. Keanu continued, his voice even lower now. There are kids watching this show who've lost everything, who don't want another celebrity telling them to just think positive or light a candle or find their inner strength. They want to know if the darkness they're drowning in can be pierced by something real. He turned again to Oprah. That's why I'm here. Not for the brand, not for the platform, just for one kid who still needs to know that Jesus didn't walk away when everyone else did. A tear slid down Oprah's cheek. She wiped it without shame. You could have come on here and given the safe answer, she said. Something vague and pretty, something everyone would clap for. But you didn't. Keanu looked out at the studio. The crowd wasn't clapping. They weren't moving. They were just present. That's the thing about truth, he said. It doesn't need applause, it just needs to be offered. He reached into his coat one final time and pulled out a small wooden cross, the one Kim had carved for him years ago. He didn't show it off. He simply placed it on the armrest of the chair beside him. Some things don't need to be held up, they hold us up. Oprah's eyes fell on the cross, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't have a comeback. He had only one word left. Thank you. Keanu nodded once. For Emily, he said, and for the one still waiting to believe it's okay to ask. The stage lights dimmed just slightly, and for a moment, even television found room for reverence. Oprah's lips barely moved. The smile that had once lit up living rooms across the world had vanished completely. What was left in its place wasn't anger. It was something more fragile. He muttered, just above a whisper, though the microphone clipped to her lapel caught every word. You don't know what it's like. I've built this for 30 years. This audience, this brand, this show. I can't walk away from it now. Her voice cracked at the word can't. The crowd remained silent. Even the camera operators, trained to capture every angle of celebrity charm, were frozen in place. No one reached for the next shot. No one moved to cue a commercial. Keanu didn't move from his seat. He didn't lean forward, didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at her with the same quiet steadiness he'd carried since the moment he stepped on that stage. You don't have to walk away, he said gently. Oprah's eyes flickered to his. You just have to kneel. The silence that followed was a kind no producer could engineer. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't dead air. It was holy. Oprah's fingers, decorated with designer rings, curled slightly on her lap. Her breath grew shaky, and for the first time in her televised career, she didn't know what to say. "You don't understand," she said, louder now, as if trying to reassemble her strength. "People expect me to stand tall, to be above it. If I bend now, if I kneel, it all unravels. It all crumbles." Keanu looked down for a moment, then slowly lifted his gaze. Maybe that's exactly what needs to happen. The crowd stirred, unsure of what they were witnessing. This wasn't a takedown. It wasn't a debate. It was something rawer. A public unraveling of a polished image, not from force, but from invitation. Keanu continued, his voice steady. "Sometimes the thing we built to protect us becomes the very thing that traps us. And sometimes the only way out is down." He gestured, not dramatically but simply, toward the small wooden cross still sitting beside him on the armrest. Oprah stared at it. "My whole life has been about rising above," she whispered. "Above poverty, above abuse, above being told I was nothing. Kneeling feels like surrender." Keanu's tone softened even more. "It is surrender, but not to defeat, to grace." He waited a beat, then added quietly, "You taught the world how to rise. Maybe now you can show them how to bow." The words didn't land like a blow. They landed like truth, like something she had known all along, but buried under success and survival. Her shoulders slumped ever so slightly. "You think I've never believed?" she asked. "I did, once, as a girl. Before the spotlight, before the expectations." Then she looked away, eyes wet now. "But the world doesn't reward surrender. It rewards the image." Keanu shook his head gently. "The world applauds the image, yes, but it is healed by the truth." She closed her eyes. The makeup artist in the wings started forward but was waved off by a producer who sensed something too real unfolding to interrupt. "I'm tired, Keanu," she said. He nodded. "Taurus. Right here, right now." She opened her eyes, and for the first time, her face wasn't the mask of a host. It was just a face. A woman's face. Older, wiser, and desperately human. Oprah looked out into the audience. These were her people. Viewers who had followed her for decades, who had clung to her words, cried with her stories, built their identities around her philosophies. She had been their compass, their comfort, their queen. And now she was trembling. One hand lifted to her chest, as though steadying something inside that threatened to fall apart. "I don't know how to let go," she said softly. "You don't have to," Keanu replied. "You just have to open your hands." For a moment, it was like the air in the room shifted. Not from a sound, not from a movement, but from something spiritual. As if the cameras, the lights, the audience, all faded into the background. Just two people remained in the center. One who had carried fame like a crown, and the other who had carried pain like a cross. Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out the small wooden cross his sister had carved. Its edges were worn smooth, its surface scarred by time and weather. He held it gently between his fingers. "This isn't a weapon," he said, "and it's not a prop. It's a reminder that I'm not enough, and I don't have to be." Oprah stared at the cross. "What if I don't believe anymore?" she asked. "Then start there," Keanu said. "God's not intimidated by your doubt. He's drawn to your honesty." There was a long pause. Oprah's lower lip quivered, her hand lowered to her lap. Then, quietly, almost imperceptibly, she whispered something. "I used to pray." Keanu nodded. "Then maybe you just forgot the sound of your own voice." Tears broke through her perfectly applied mascara. One drop, then another. She didn't wipe them away. She didn't perform. For the first time in years, she didn't need to. They promise more. It'll get better. The audience was silent. Some people began crying quietly in their seats. One woman clutched the cross around her neck. A man in the back dropped his phone into his lap, no longer recording. Something holy was unfolding, and everyone knew it. The lights above dimmed slightly. It wasn't planned. It was the automatic system adjusting to ambient light. But to everyone watching, it felt symbolic. Oprah took a deep breath. "Do you think he still hears me?" Keanu didn't hesitate. He never stopped. She closed her eyes. A single sob slipped through her lips, not loud, but enough to break the silence wide open. And then, slowly, shakily, Oprah rose from her chair. The audience watched, holding their collective breath. She didn't speak, didn't grandstand, didn't try to reclaim control of the narrative. She simply walked across the stage and knelt. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't dignified in the way the world usually defined her. But it was real. Keanu didn't move toward her. He bowed his head in silent reverence. No music played. No applause rose. Just the quiet sound of a powerful woman laying her image down. Oprah whispered words into the air, words the microphone didn't catch. But anyone watching didn't need to hear them. They could feel them. After a long moment, she looked up, not at Keanu, not at the cameras, but upward, toward something unseen. And then, for the first time since the segment began, she smiled. Not the rehearsed one, not the public one, a different kind, gentle, worn, free. The control room didn't know what to do. This wasn't the show they'd prepared for, this wasn't the angle they'd pitched, but no one dared interrupt. Because for one perfect, fragile moment, television became something else entirely. A window, and on the other side, a soul returning home. Keanu stood still for a moment. The kind of stillness that didn't demand attention but carried it anyway. His shoulders rose and fell with a slow breath, as if bracing himself. Not for the world's eyes, but for something deeper, something unseen. Then, with no music swelling, no lights shifting for dramatic effect, he slowly bent his knees and knelt down. Right there on the stage. The same polished studio floor that had hosted hundreds of celebrity interviews and media spectacles now held something sacred. A man, in a simple shirt and jeans, head bowed in prayer. A man who wasn't trying to convert anyone, impress anyone, or build a brand. Just a man who believed. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't gasp. They simply watched. Some leaned forward, as if afraid to blink. Keanu's lips moved, barely above a whisper. "He's tired," he said, voice low and steady. "Let her stop carrying it alone." He didn't look up, didn't glance at the cameras. His prayer wasn't for them. Oprah remained frozen in her chair. Her hands trembled slightly. Her breath came shallow and uneven. Whatever walls she had built, for decades, made of achievement, accolades, power, and poise, had begun to crack. And now, one by one, they fell. She looked at Keanu. Not the Hollywood icon, not the interview guest. Just the man kneeling for her. A sob caught in her throat. The audience watched her slowly slide forward in her chair, her fingers gripping the arms as if steadying herself against an unseen current. Her legs wobbled when she stood. She took one step forward, then another. Her heels clicked softly on the floor. Then they stopped. And finally, with every camera still rolling, she did something no one could have predicted. She knelt. Her knees hit the floor harder than his. She winced but didn't complain. She placed one trembling hand on her heart, the other open beside her. And she began to cry. Not the kind of crying made for daytime television. Not the elegant, single teeter type meant to elicit empathy without surrender. These tears were raw, years in the making. From losses unspoken, regrets unshared, wounds unrevealed. No one in the audience moved. Even the cameramen slowly lowered their equipment, unsure what to do. One of the floor producers whispered into a headset, "Should we cut to commercial?" Silence answered her. No one dared interrupt. Keanu didn't touch her, didn't try to guide the moment. He stayed in place, head still bowed, hands together, lips moving silently in prayer. From the back row, someone stood, an older woman in a blue blouse. She folded her hands and closed her eyes. Then another person stood, a man in a suit, tears in his eyes. One by one, audience members followed, not to perform, not to be seen, but because something inside them was cracking too. The control room, still in chaos, switched to a wide-angle shot. From above, the image was surreal. Two figures on their knees, surrounded by a sea of people standing in silence. No spotlight needed. The moment carried its own light. Then, slowly, Oprah lifted her head. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes swollen and red, and yet there was something new in them. Not clarity, not resolution, but a beginning, a turning. She whispered, "I don't know how to start again." Keanu looked at her and said, "You already did." Oprah's hands trembled as she wiped her face. The makeup had long given up. There was no fixing it. But she didn't care. For once, the image didn't matter. Only the moment did. The silence in the studio stretched on, long past the point any producer would normally allow. But no one dared to speak. No cue cards. No countdowns, no commercial breaks. Finally, Keanu reached into his pocket. He unfolded the worn letter, the one from Emily. His fingers smoothed it gently, reverently, as if handling something sacred. He read from it again, but now his voice was louder, not for drama, but for honesty. He said, "I lost my dad, I lost my faith, but when I watched you sit quietly on that stage last year and say, 'Don't give up on hope,' I started to believe again. Is Jesus real? Please tell me the truth." He looked over at Oprah. "That's who I kneel for. Not because I have all the answers, but because I believe in the one who does." Oprah's breathing grew ragged. She stared at the floor, the tears still falling. "I was raised in church," she said finally, voice low. "I knew the words. I gave speeches about spirituality, but I haven't really prayed in years." Keanu gave no sermon, no reply. He just listened. Oprah looked up at him again. "I wanted to be strong for the world," she said, "but I forgot how to be weak before God." The audience began crying quietly too, some holding hands, others wiping their faces silently. Then, something unexpected happened. From the control booth, the live feed, still running, started receiving messages from viewers. Thousands of them, streaming in by the second. "I've never believed before, but I just got on my knees. I'm crying. I don't know why, but I needed this. Please don't stop this moment, please." The show was supposed to be about faith in the modern world, but it had become something else. Something older, something sacred, something true. Keanu remained kneeling, head bowed, as the weight of the room shifted. No stage, no host, just people, souls stripped of pretense. Oprah slowly reached for his hand. Her voice trembled. "I don't know where to begin." Keanu whispered, "You don't need to, he already knows." She closed her eyes. Her shoulders shook as a single word slipped from her lips. "Jesus." It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't broadcast ready, but it was real. And somewhere, watching from a hospital bed, Emily wept with hope. The studio lights dimmed, as if even the electricity understood that something eternal had entered the room. Outside the building, crowds gathered around screens. In homes, offices, airports, people paused. Not for a celebrity, not for a scandal, but for a stillness that spoke louder than sound. The world didn't know how to explain what was happening, but hearts did. And as the final camera faded to black, it captured one last image. Keanu Reeves on his knees, hand in hand with the most powerful woman in media. No spotlight, no applause, just surrender. The silence lingered like a held breath. Oprah sat still, her fingers lightly wrapped around Keanu's. Her face, usually polished and composed, trembled with something raw. Decades of professionalism, branding, and control seemed to melt beneath the weight of a single truth. She had nowhere left to hide. The studio didn't know what to do. Producers stood frozen in the wings. Viewers were still watching. But none of it seemed to matter anymore. Something more important was unfolding, and it wasn't scripted. Oprah inhaled sharply and let it out like a wound finally exhaling. Her eyes flooded. "I don't know how to stop pretending," she said, barely above a whisper. Keanu stayed quiet. He didn't try to fix it, didn't try to save her. He just sat with her in it, letting the weight of her confession breathe. It was the kind of silence that felt like truth, the kind that made space for real healing. Oprah wiped at her tears, but they kept coming. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't curated. It was the kind of weeping that came from deep within the bones, the kind that only shows up when a person finally stops performing. "I've carried this image for so long," she murmured. "The empire, the answers, the audience. But somewhere along the way, I lost who I was when no one was watching." She turned to Keanu, her voice cracking. "I've spent my whole life trying to be enough, to fill the space my father left, to outrun the fear of being invisible again." Keanu's gaze never left her. "You don't have to outrun it anymore," he said. "That fear, God already knows it, and He's not asking you to be enough." She looked at him with wet, searching eyes. "Then what is He asking?" Keanu leaned forward, voice steady. "To let go, to let Him carry what you've been trying to control." Her shoulders dropped, as if those words touched a place too tired to keep holding everything up. She let out a shaky laugh, choked with grief and truth. "I'm afraid," she said. "I'm afraid if I let go, there won't be anything left of me, that I won't be enough without all of it, the success, the image, the influence." Keanu reached out and took both of her hands in his. "That's where grace starts," he said gently. "When we finally stop being enough." Oprah stared at him, the words echoing through something hollow inside her, not in a way that hurt, but in a way that finally made sense. For years, she had inspired millions with affirmations of strength, power, and personal truth. But this was different. This wasn't about rising. It was about surrendering. And somehow, in that moment, it didn't feel like weakness. The crowd, though silent, was transfixed. They weren't watching an interview anymore. They were witnessing something sacred. She squeezed Keanu's hands, her voice low and trembling. "I've told people for years to find their light, but I've been exhausted trying to be mine." Keanu nodded slowly. "Because you were never meant to be the source, just the reflection." Those words landed hard. She covered her face, letting herself weep without apology. It was the first time in decades she had cried in front of an audience. Not from sadness, not from manipulation, but from release, the kind that comes when truth breaks the dam. "I feel like I'm losing everything I've built," she said, voice cracking. Keanu didn't flinch. "Sometimes God dismantles the towers we build just to show us we never needed them." She looked up at him with aching vulnerability. "Why me? Why now?" He gave her a long, quiet look. "Maybe because someone watching right now needed to see you break, to know it's okay to let go. Maybe grace isn't just for the fallen. Maybe it's for the ones who thought they had to fly forever." Oprah's lips parted. Her hand slowly moved to her lap. She closed her eyes. "Then I want to stop flying." The room stayed still. No music swelled, no applause came. Just stillness. Sacred, imperfect stillness. Behind the cameras, a floor manager put down his headset. One of the producers, usually hyper-vigilant, wiped her eyes and didn't care who saw. Even the camera crew, trained to stay detached, lowered their lenses out of reverence. Oprah's voice returned, small and shaken. "Do you think he still wants me?" she asked. Keanu didn't blink. Never stopped. A pause. "Never needed you to be clean, just willing." That cracked something even deeper. Oprah lowered her head again, but this time it wasn't in shame, it was reverence. A lifetime of perfectionism, control, and image collapsed. Not in ruin, but in surrender. She reached into the small table beside her chair and pulled out the note cards with her talking points. One by one, she tore them in half. "Oprah?" a producer called nervously from offstage. She didn't even look up. "I'm done selling clarity when I've been walking in confusion." The producer froze. Oprah turned back to Keanu. "I read every book, talked to every guru, interviewed every expert, and none of it gave me peace like what you just said in a whisper." He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He just nodded gently. "Peace isn't complicated, it's just surrendered." She laughed through the tears, raw and surprised. "I've never felt this exposed." Keanu leaned closer. "Maybe that's where healing begins, not in hiding our wounds, but in letting someone see them." She took a long breath and reached out, not for performance, but for connection. "I want that healing." Keanu's eyes filled too, not with pride, but with awe. "Then just ask." Oprah closed her eyes and breathed one word. "Please." In that moment, all the noise of her career faded. Not gone, just quiet. There were no mantras, no book titles, no carefully crafted branding. Just a woman asking for grace, and a man who knew where to point her. The cameras stayed on, but no one moved. No music played, no outro screen rolled. There was no branding, no applause sign, no cue to return to smiles or talking points. Just silence. It was the kind of silence that doesn't beg to be filled. The kind that speaks more than any words could. Keanu reached out and helped Oprah to her feet. Her legs trembled a little as she rose, but she stood on her own. They didn't say anything to each other. They didn't have to. Their eyes carried everything. The studio lights, still glaring overhead, suddenly felt too artificial for what had just happened. The set, once designed to look polished and inviting, now felt like sacred ground. Something had been broken there, but something more important had been made whole. Someone behind the cameras finally whispered, "Cut!" but even that felt too loud. Oprah didn't return to her dressing room. She didn't pick up her notes. She didn't check with her producers. She just walked off the stage, hand brushing the side of her chair one last time. There was a weight to her movement, but also a strange lightness, like someone who had laid something down after carrying it far too long. Keanu didn't linger. He nodded briefly to the crew, offered a small thank you to the assistant who had once asked him if he had merchandise to sell. Then he quietly walked through the same hallway he had entered through hours before. He didn't wait for press, he didn't offer a quote, he didn't even take the exit producers had prepared for him. He left through the side door, unnoticed by the crowd that had begun gathering outside the building. By the time the episode was edited for broadcast, there was debate about what to do. Some of the executive producers wanted to cut the uncomfortable parts. Others argued it was the most honest thing the show had ever aired. In the end, they released it unedited. The raw footage, the awkward silences, the broken sobs, the whispered prayer, all of it went live, and the world watched. Within hours, the clip had gone viral, not in a flashy, scandalous way, but quietly, reverently. People weren't sharing it to laugh or debate. They were sharing it because something in it had touched something buried deep inside themselves. The video was titled only, "The Conversation That Changed Everything." Comments flooded in from around the world. I've never cried watching an interview before, but this felt sacred. That wasn't a celebrity moment, that was a soul moment. The most human moment ever broadcast. But while the world buzzed with reaction, Keanu was nowhere to be found. He didn't return calls, didn't respond to requests from networks begging for interviews. News outlets scrambled to follow up, but every source came back with the same answer. He's gone back to the cabin. No agents confirmed it, no publicist issued a statement. But somehow, people knew. Some said he was hiding, others said he was praying. But those who had known him long enough understood this wasn't about avoidance, it was about alignment. Keanu Reeves hadn't gone silent, he'd simply gone home. Far from the cities, where the lights never dimmed and every moment was content, there was a small wooden cabin tucked beneath whispering trees and surrounded by quiet things. Streams, pine needles, sky. That's where he returned. The next morning, the clouds hung low over the mountain as Keanu stepped out onto the porch, barefoot, mug of coffee in hand. He looked older than the man who had just been on the world's biggest stage, but not in a weary way. He looked seasoned, as if the storm had rinsed him clean. He sat on the porch swing, the same one he'd used to read letters from strangers and pray for wisdom when no one else was watching. A folded newspaper sat beside him on the bench. Its front page read, "The Kneeling That Changed Everything." He didn't read it. Instead, he reached into his flannel shirt pocket and pulled out the letter from Emily. The same letter he had read on stage. The edges were now more worn, the creases deeper, but her words still echoed. "Is Jesus real? Please tell me the truth." He had, and the world had listened. Some ridiculed him, others questioned his motives, but most had simply felt something shift. Something too fragile to explain, yet too real to deny. Like watching a stone skip across a still lake and somehow knowing the ripples would never stop moving. Keanu looked out at the trees, where fall had already begun its slow whisper across the leaves. Red, gold, orange. They fluttered and fell, like small reminders that beauty often comes with letting go. He whispered, "Thank you." Not for the fame, not for the headlines, but for the grace to speak. Not his own words, but the words that mattered. Back in the city, social media boiled over with debates. Some influencers mocked the moment, others said it felt orchestrated. But beneath all the noise, millions of comments poured in from people who didn't have platforms, just hearts that had cracked open a little. A young man from Detroit wrote, "I watched that clip alone in my room. I hadn't prayed in 10 years, but when he knelt, I did too." A single mom in Iowa posted, "I used to believe God had forgotten me, but watching Oprah cry like that, maybe we're all just tired of pretending we're fine." And Emily, from her hospital bed, posted one sentence, "I believe now." The clip became more than a moment. It became a mirror, not of Keanu, not of Oprah, but of us. And still, Keanu didn't return. He wasn't at the award shows that tried to honor him. He didn't appear on follow-up podcasts or join panel discussions. He didn't tweet a word. Because for him, it had never been about being seen. It had been about being faithful. At first, it was just a ripple. A few reposts, a few shares. Then it surged. The clip of Keanu kneeling on Oprah's stage was uploaded by a studio intern just minutes after the broadcast ended. Within hours, it was spreading across platforms faster than anyone could track. YouTube, X, Instagram, TikTok, Telegram, Reddit, Threads. Every corner of the internet ignited like dry brush catching fire in the wind. The moment, silent, raw, unpolished, defied the usual structure of viral content. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, there was no music overlay, no clever caption, no jump cuts. just a man kneeling, and a woman trembling beside him. It was translated into over 25 languages in just 3 days. First Spanish and Portuguese, then Hindi, Mandarin, Arabic, Tagalog, and Russian. Soon, captions were appearing in Ukrainian, Swahili, Farsi, and Icelandic. Global subtitles carried a single, powerful line from Keanu that echoed in every corner of the world. He's tired, let her stop carrying it alone. Some editors added a soft piano score behind the moment. Others left it untouched. Atheists debated it in university forums. "I don't believe in God," one wrote, "but I can't deny that something sacred happened there." Christians shared it across church groups with tears in their eyes. A pastor in rural Kentucky played it during Sunday service and couldn't finish his sermon. He just wept. A megachurch in Nigeria turned it into a 3-part message series titled "When Silence Speaks Louder." And in a prison chapel in Brazil, 12 inmates reportedly dropped to their knees and prayed for the first time in years. But Keanu remained unseen. He didn't release a statement. He didn't comment on the trending hashtags. He didn't monetize the moment or direct it toward a charity or product launch. Instead, he remained tucked away in the quiet, still letting his soul breathe. Each morning, as the digital world spun in overdrive, Keanu walked the same narrow trail that looped through the forest behind his cabin. He kept a small backpack slung over one shoulder. Inside it were 2 things: a thermos of black coffee and a canvas pouch of letters. The letters came daily now. Hundreds. Thousands. They were hand-delivered by a quiet delivery man who'd been instructed not to disturb him. He left the mail in a weatherproof box at the foot of the trail and disappeared without a word. Keanu would retrieve them after sunrise. Some letters were only a paragraph long. "I don't know what I believe, but your stillness made me want to stop running." Others were pages and pages, spilling grief, confession, longing. "My daughter overdosed last year. I hated God for it. But watching you hold space for Oprah like that, it broke something in me, in a good way." Another, written in looping cursive, simply read, "I'm old, no one listens to me anymore, but I saw you kneel and I realized, maybe God still does." Keanu read them all. Not quickly, not to tally the impact, but slowly, reverently, as if each one carried a soul inside. Keanu sat on a boulder deep in the woods, sunlight filtering through the pines, one letter open in his hands. It was from a teenage boy in Kansas. The handwriting was jagged, uncertain. "I used to think faith was just something weak people needed," it read, "but I watched that clip, and I don't know, maybe strength is something different. Maybe it's being willing to kneel even when no one else does." He folded the letter slowly and slid it back into the pouch. Somewhere, a woodpecker tapped against a tree. The forest didn't care about trending hashtags. The leaves didn't whisper anything about ratings. Nature had its own rhythm, one that moved at the speed of truth. And Keanu had always felt closer to God out here than in any cathedral built by fame. Inside the studios and spotlight, people wanted answers quickly. Quotes, headlines, reels. But out here, time slowed enough for questions to breathe. He thought about Oprah, how her eyes had filled, how her voice had cracked when she whispered, "I don't know how to stop pretending." That wasn't a performance, that wasn't a ratings gimmick, that was a woman at the end of herself. And yet, something in her had reached for mercy. He'd felt it happen, like a shift in gravity. One moment the room was polished and curated, the next it was holy ground. And now the world was reacting as if it too had caught a glimpse of something it didn't know it needed. One comment online read, "I've watched celebrities break down on TV before, but this wasn't a breakdown, it was a breakthrough." Another, "My dad is a hard man, never cried, not once. But after watching that clip, he sat in silence for 10 minutes and whispered, 'I wish someone had knelt for me when I was breaking.'" Even secular commentators were calling it the most unfiltered moment in modern broadcast history. Some journalists, unsure how to describe it, resorted to phrases like accidental revival and emotional detonation. One columnist in The Guardian simply titled her piece, "The Day Vulnerability Went Viral." And through it all, Keanu said nothing. He'd turned down every interview request. The top late-night hosts invited him. He declined. A best-selling author offered to co-write a book with him. He didn't even respond. Netflix offered a documentary deal. He passed. His agent, baffled, tried again. "Keanu, this is your moment. People want your voice." Keanu just replied softly, "They've already heard it." Because for him, it was never about the moment. It was about the message. The world didn't need another celebrity endorsement of faith. It didn't need branded enlightenment. What it needed, what it was starving for, was proof that someone still believed in something bigger than themselves, and that maybe, just maybe, surrender wasn't weakness. It was the doorway to peace. He slipped another letter from the pouch. This one had shaky handwriting and no return address. "Dear Keanu, my wife passed away during the pandemic. I haven't been to church since. I haven't prayed. I've been angry for so long. But when I saw you on that stage, I remembered what it felt like to believe again. Thank you for not performing. Thank you for not preaching. Thank you for kneeling." Keanu held the letter against his chest. Then he whispered, "Thank you, Lord." He stood and stretched, gazing up at the tall trees above him. He didn't know how long the moment would last online. He didn't care. What mattered was what came after the moment. Would people go back to scrolling? Or would they stop, even briefly, and wonder if there was a better way? He wasn't responsible for the outcome, he knew that. But he could choose to keep living in a way that made space for truth, for grace, for awe, and maybe, just maybe, for others to kneel too. There was no press conference, no production team, no grand announcement. Just a handheld phone camera, a shaky angle, and Oprah Winfrey's bare face lit by the soft light of morning. Her voice, when she spoke, was quieter than anyone had ever heard it. "Hi, it's me." She paused, breathing out slowly, as if bracing herself. "I've spent my life telling stories, asking questions, creating spaces for truth. But this past week," she swallowed hard, "I found something I wasn't looking for." The video wasn't edited. There were no cuts, no filters, just silence between sentences. The kind of silence that made people lean closer. "I met him," she said. "Not an idea, not a myth, not a brand I could sell." Her lips trembled, but she didn't look away from the lens. "I met Jesus." That single sentence detonated across every media platform. But Oprah kept going. "I've spent 30 years shaping a message about inner light and self-power. And maybe I helped people along the way. I hope I did. But when I stood on that stage with Keanu Reeves, I realized I'd been selling hope that couldn't carry anyone through the real fire." She looked down for a long moment, blinking. "I built an empire on the idea that if you dig deep enough inside yourself, you'll find peace. But peace doesn't live inside us. Not really. Not the kind that lasts. That peace, it's a gift from someone bigger than us." She looked up again, eyes raw. "And I'm done selling what was never mine to sell." The internet imploded within minutes. Her clip, titled simply "I Met Him," was viewed over 30 million times in the first 12 hours. People didn't just share it, they wept through it. Influencers reposted it without commentary. News anchors quoted it on air with hushed voices. Pastors around the world played it during Sunday service. And while the media tried to make sense of it, Oprah took quiet steps no one expected. She shut down her spiritual product lines, candles, books, courses, all of it. Every website redirect now led to a single page with one sentence: "Grace can't be merchandised." The next day, she canceled 3 major speaking engagements and returned the fees. But that wasn't what truly stunned people. It was what happened 2 days later. A nurse at St. Mary's Children's Hospital in Chicago snapped a blurry photo that was posted without caption. It showed Oprah sitting cross-legged on the floor of a pediatric cancer ward, holding a worn Bible in her lap. A little girl with no hair rested her head against Oprah's shoulder, listening. That girl was Emily, the same girl who had written the letter Keanu read on air, the one who had asked, "Is Jesus real?" And now, Oprah was reading to her from the Gospel of John. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. The nurse who posted the photo wrote only this: "He wasn't posing. She didn't know I was there. She just whispered the words like she believed them." The media rushed to verify the moment. Paparazzi couldn't find her. Publicists refused to comment. Oprah had seemingly stepped out of the machine she had built and disappeared into something real. But the world didn't need clarification. It felt the change. On her social media platforms, the carefully curated inspirational quotes and glossy promo images were gone. Instead, one pinned message greeted the millions who visited her pages. "I won't be everything I was, but I'll be something I never dared to be before, undone and saved." The comment sections exploded, not with criticism, but with stories. Mother in Brazil wrote, "I was raised atheist. My daughter was dying. Oprah's video made me pray for the first time in my life." A young man in South Korea posted, "I thought God was for weak people. I watched her cry without shame. Now I understand grace isn't weakness, it's the start of strength." An old producer who once worked for her said, "That woman used to review every camera angle before anything aired. And now, she's just raw." I don't know what happened, but it's real. Oprah's transformation didn't follow a neat timeline. It didn't fit a brand relaunch or public rebranding strategy. She didn't hire a team to manage the transition. She simply kept showing up where she never had before. Quiet places, forgotten rooms, lives that couldn't repay her. In one unannounced visit, she spent the afternoon at a women's shelter in Atlanta, not speaking about her story, but listening. Sitting in a circle of brokenness, holding the hand of a mother who had lost everything, Oprah whispered a single phrase: "You are not beyond rescue." She wasn't preaching. She was bleeding truth from her own scars. Reporters kept digging, trying to find the angle, the strategy, the controversy. But there was none. No press agents, no upcoming book tour, no monetized faith campaign. Just a woman who had seen too much to keep lying, even to herself. It was one clip, however, that caught the world off guard again. It was released by a youth pastor from a small inner-city church in Detroit. In the video, Oprah stood at the back of a dimly lit sanctuary as teenagers sang off-key worship songs with reckless joy. She wasn't on the stage. She wasn't giving a talk. She was swaying gently, eyes closed, tears streaming down her cheeks. The caption read, "She didn't ask for cameras, didn't mention her name. She just showed up and worshiped like she'd been starving her whole life." And in many ways, maybe she had. Because for decades, Oprah had been the giver of light, the distributor of wisdom, the queen of answers. But now, she wasn't trying to shine. She was just trying to be found. And she was. Not by cameras or headlines, but by the very savior she once dismissed. And though Keanu Reeves never spoke publicly about what happened that day on her stage, those who knew him said he carried one letter in his jacket wherever he went. The one from Emily. He said it reminded him that truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just kneels. The wind made no announcement as it moved through the tall pines outside Keanu's cabin. The forest breathed slowly, as if it too had witnessed something it couldn't fully comprehend. Inside, the world was still. The kettle hissed quietly on the stove. The fire crackled low in the hearth. And on the small table beside the armchair sat a stack of unopened letters. Most had no return address. A few had smudged stamps or crumpled edges, but all of them, Keanu knew, carried a kind of weight that couldn't be measured in ink or paper. He reached for one envelope in particular. It had arrived 2 days earlier, slipped into his mailbox by hand, not by courier. The writing was shaky, almost trembling, across the torn envelope. It simply read, "From RJ, Cell Block C, Folsom State Prison." Keanu didn't recognize the name, but something about the uneven lettering had stayed with him. He opened it slowly, smoothing out the creases as he read. "Mr. Reeves, they said we could write letters to anyone. Some guys picked celebrities to joke. I picked you because when you knelt, I saw myself for the first time in years. I've lied. I've hurt people. I've worn masks behind masks. But when you said he was real enough to die for me, something cracked in me. If a man like you can kneel, maybe I can too. Maybe I don't have to be strong to be forgiven. I don't expect you to write back. I just needed someone to know that today, for the first time in 17 years, I prayed. I didn't know the words, I just said, 'Jesus, please, don't leave me alone.' RJ." Keanu sat in silence. The letter didn't need music behind it. It didn't need a viral headline. It just needed to be heard. He folded it carefully and reached for his Bible, the same one that had traveled with him across cities, countries, and quiet moments. He opened it to the page in Luke where the thief on the cross whispered, "Remember me." He tucked the letter inside and closed it gently. Outside, the sky was slipping from evening into velvet black. Stars blinked into place, slow and ancient. Keanu stepped out onto the porch, letting the door swing shut behind him. He didn't bring his phone, didn't bring any words rehearsed for another platform. He just stood barefoot on the wooden planks, breathing in the night. And then, almost instinctively, he walked down the steps, across the grass, and onto a small clearing where the trees opened just enough to reveal the stars in full. He knelt, not for show, not because anyone was watching, but because something inside him had never stopped being small before God. He let the silence sit on his shoulders like a warm coat. And then he whispered, "Thank you for letting me be nothing." It wasn't self-pity, it wasn't despair. It was worship. The stars shimmered above like tiny windows into something, older than pain, bigger than fear. Keanu stayed kneeling in the clearing, the cool grass pressing against his knees, the earth holding him like it had always known he would come back. He didn't speak for a while. He didn't need to. The air was full of echoes, not of sound, but of lives. The girl named Emily, who had written from her hospital bed. Oprah, trembling as she let herself break. RJ, behind prison bars, whispering a prayer he barely understood. All of them had been carried into this moment like waves returning to the sea. Keanu thought of how many years he had spent trying to make sense of loss. His father, friends, his own mistakes, the shame he never talked about, the guilt that fame couldn't scrub clean. But out here, in the middle of the woods, kneeling under the sky, he wasn't famous. He was just a man, and that was enough. He remembered something he'd heard once in a small chapel in a country no one talked about. An old man had said, "You don't get to carry peace into the world until you've let it break you first." Keanu exhaled slowly. That's what had happened on that stage. That's why he hadn't tried to defend himself when Oprah mocked his faith. That's why he didn't argue, or posture, or rise in pride. Because peace doesn't shout, it kneels. A sudden breeze moved through the trees like a whisper. Leaves danced in response. The whole forest seemed to bow. He whispered again, barely audible. "I don't need to be enough. You are." And for a moment, the silence that followed felt like an answer. Then a sound came. A faint crunch of gravel on the far edge of the trail. Keanu turned his head, not startled, but curious. It was Jack, the quiet park ranger who occasionally checked in to make sure the cabin's generator worked. He stood at a respectful distance, hat in his hand, eyes lowered. "I'm sorry," Jack said softly. "Didn't mean to interrupt." "You didn't," Keanu said. Jack took a breath, looked uncomfortable, then pulled something from his coat pocket. A folded page, slightly wrinkled. "This came for you." "Hand-delivered?" "From a girl. Said her name was Emily." Keanu's heart paused for a beat. He stood, legs stiff from kneeling, and took the letter. Jack nodded once and walked away, leaving him alone again. Keanu opened the envelope. "Dear Keanu, they say I have more time now. The treatments are working. I still don't know everything about faith, but I know I want to know Jesus more. When you kneeled that night, you gave a whole world of people permission to stop pretending. And I stopped pretending. Thank you for showing me that strength doesn't mean standing tall. Sometimes it means falling down and staying there long enough to hear God whisper back, 'Love, Emily.'" Keanu folded the letter slowly, hands steady but eyes full. He slipped it inside his Bible next to RJ's. Then he looked back at the sky, now darker, richer, quieter. One star seemed to blink brighter than the rest, and Keanu smiled. Not the smile of a man who had figured it all out, but the smile of a man who had stopped trying. He bowed his head one last time and said the only word that mattered, "Amen." The moonlight spilled across the quiet clearing like a slow tide, touching the edges of the cabin, the trees, and the man sitting alone on a wooden bench with his hands folded gently in his lap. Keanu didn't speak. He didn't have to. The silence around him carried its own weight, deeper than sound, stronger than applause. His eyes lifted slowly toward the night sky, stars dim against the brightness of the moon, and he breathed in like he was tasting the stillness. For all the noise the world had made over that single moment on stage, for all the headlines and hashtags and headlines again, this was the only place that felt real. A soft wind stirred the trees, and for a second, it sounded like whispering. But Keanu just smiled faintly, shook his head, and leaned back. His Bible rested on the bench beside him, worn from use and marked with folded corners and scribbled margins. A prison letter tucked inside stuck out just enough to show its edge. The ink faded from days of being opened, read, and read again. He hadn't returned to the stage. He hadn't accepted the invitation to do a follow-up. There was no second interview, no documentary deal, no book launch. Just trees, moonlight, and a quiet man who kept kneeling when no one else was looking. And maybe that's the part the world couldn't quite explain. Voiceover. This wasn't about one moment on a stage. It wasn't about a man and a mogul or a live crowd holding its breath. This was about something more timeless. A quiet man holding a line when the world needed to remember what truth sounds like. In a world of curated images and trending beliefs, Keanu didn't try to become a voice. He became a witness. There's a difference. One speaks to be heard, the other lives what they say, especially when no one's watching. That's what shook people. It wasn't his words. It was that he meant them. It's why the comment sections exploded, why a new kind of conversation began, why even skeptics paused and wondered if maybe, just maybe, faith wasn't what they'd been sold. Because when someone gives up their image to protect their soul, something in us wakes up. It stirs the part of us we've been trying to quiet, the ache for something that doesn't spin when the world spins, something that holds. And in that moment under the lights, Keanu had given them a glimpse, not of religion, but of surrender. Voiceover continues. The stage didn't change him, it revealed him. Long before the cameras, before the audience, before Oprah's tears or the letter from Emily, there had been nights like this one. Quiet, ordinary nights in a cabin surrounded by trees, where truth didn't need defending because it simply existed. That was the thing about Keanu. He never tried to impress it upon you. He didn't demand belief. He just lived in a way that made you want to ask questions again. A teenager from Ohio wrote, "I used to think faith was for the weak, but maybe it's for the brave, because it takes courage to kneel when everyone's standing." A woman from Denmark shared, "I'm not a Christian. I don't even know what I am. But when Keanu knelt, something in me cracked open. I haven't stopped searching since." An elderly man in Brazil uploaded a video of himself kneeling beside his wife's grave. "If a man like that believes in grace, maybe there's enough left for me too." Keanu never replied to those comments, but he read them. And each time he would walk a little deeper into the woods, sit beneath the same bent pine, and whisper prayers into the wind. Not for attention, not for followers, but for the people whose stories reached him, those holding on by threads, wondering if they were too late to start again. A man who kneels, the voiceover says, knows what it means to fall, but he also knows what it means to rise with help not his own. And isn't that what this was all about? Not arguments, not debates, not winning, but yielding. That's why the clip lived far beyond the trending tab. It wasn't just a viral moment, it was a mirror. People saw themselves in it, saw their pride, their fear, their masks. And for some, for the first time, they saw a different way. He never preached, he never quoted 1,000 verses, he just folded a letter, placed it in his Bible, and got on his knees. Oprah would later say, "I saw something I'd never seen before. Not in all my years, not in all the people I've interviewed. I saw a man who had nothing to prove, but still stood firm." And then he knelt. The media tried to frame it as a cultural moment, a shift, a controversy. But it was never any of those things. It was personal, it was holy, and most of all, it was quiet. Under the hush of nightfall, Keanu sat beneath the stars, not as a celebrity, not as a hero, but as a man with empty hands and a heart still learning. The world kept spinning, opinions kept shouting, but he remained in stillness. That was his witness, not eloquence, stillness. The wind moved through the trees like a breath, and somewhere, across oceans and cities, in living rooms and hospital beds, people were listening again, not to noise, but to something deeper, something sacred. Voiceover. This wasn't about one moment on a stage. It was about a quiet man holding a line when the world needed to remember what truth sounds like. He was never trying to become a symbol. He simply refused to let the silence be empty. A candle lit in the dark doesn't argue with the darkness. It just stays lit. Keanu wasn't a preacher. He wasn't a brand. He was a man who knelt and invited the world to wonder why. And now we ask you, have you ever knelt in truth? Or are you still holding the mask? If this story moved something in you, if it made you pause, made you remember, made you hope, share your heart below. Tell us your story and tell us who else needs to hear this one. Because sometimes the softest voice is the one that echoes the longest.